Hello, this is Chuck Carnevale, co-founder of FastGraphs, the Fundamentals Analyzer software tool. And with this video, I'm proud to introduce our new dividend reinvestment option when calculating performance utilizing FastGraphs. However, before I show you our new improved performance calculation, let me review how we used to calculate performance. I'm going to use Johnson & Johnson here as my example, and I'm going to look at a 20-year graph. And always remember, when we say 20 years in a graph, it's 19 years of history plus the year we're in. If I drew a 15-year graph, it would be 14 years of history plus the year we're in, etc. So in this case, when we're calculating performance, when you go to our old original version of our performance calculation, you would look at the date-to-date calculation. In other words, this started out on December 31st, 1993, a $1,000 investment would have bought 89.14 shares of Johnson & Johnson at a split-adjusted price of $11.22. The closing value on April 2nd, 2013 of Johnson & Johnson was $82.69. So that $1,000 in capital appreciation only would have grown to $7,300.70, and we list that right here at the top. So you can see capital appreciation by going across the line. Then additionally, we would add the dividend component and add it separately because, again, no dividends are reinvested in this iteration. So here you would see that on the 89.14 shares that you purchased at 28 cents a share, you would have received $25.18 or a 2.5% rate of return. We had each year's dividend growth rate listed here, and then we had the payout ratio or the percentage of earnings that were paid out each year, and then we had the cumulative total cash dividends listed. But what's important here is you would see that a $1,000 investment in this case would have thrown off $1,961 in dividends over this 19-plus year period. The $1,000 would have grown to over $7,000, so your capital appreciation only was 10.9%. But capital appreciation plus dividend income would have turned $1,000 into $9,332.52 or 12.3% per annum. But again, no dividends reinvested here. I always like this version because it shows what you earned from capital appreciation or capital gain and what you earned from dividend income separately, and then you still saw them collectively. With our new and improved version of FastGraphs with dividend reinvestment option, there are several changes. You will first of all be able to see in the navigation bar that we've color-coded the reinvestment of dividends at end of quarter. That's what EOQ stands for. And we highlighted that in our dividend blue because when you look at the main fast graph, this represents earnings. This represents the percentage of these earnings that are paid out in the form of dividends, and they're color-coded light blue as they are here in the FastFacts table. By the way, a quick tip here. When you're looking at FastFacts, if you roll over these, you'll get pop-up windows explaining what each of these features are and color-coded as well as here. But if you click on the word FastFacts, it'll turn gray. And I want you to notice those roll-ups no longer are active. So if they're an annoyance to you when you're trying to do graphing, you can shut them off. But then if you forget what you're looking at, you can always click it back on and the pop-ups will work. So when you look at the reinvestment dividends, you check this box to have the performance table calculated with dividends reinvested each quarter. Dividends, when reinvested, are reinvested at the end of quarter, which is what EOQ stands for, in which they are paid. And there had to be some rule to doing that. Now, we also added another box here. We can change how much money we invested, and we're going to leave the default on here just so we can compare to what I showed you previously. So with this new option, there's been several changes to the table and the performance calculation, and this is still looking at it separate, capital appreciation separate from dividend income. But we've added a couple of features. For one thing, this column here will now be the end of the fiscal year, not the calendar year. If I would put Procter & Gamble in as an example and replace it with Johnson & Johnson in this example, you will see that the fiscal year for Procter & Gamble is June. And you also see that by putting your cursor on the diamonds that are listed on the graph or the asterisk. But let me go back to Johnson & Johnson now so I can compare what I showed you earlier to what you have now. So in the case of Johnson & Johnson, keeping everything separate like we had before, we've just altered the performance calculation table a little bit. You still have the beginning original $1,000 growing to $7,370. You still have the dividends per share. You still have the dividend growth rate, But one thing that I request we've added is the dividend growth rate average for whatever period you're measuring. If I shortened this to a 10-year graph, it would be the dividend growth rate for 9-year average. Remember, it's 9 years of history, and 1 year you're in would be a 10-year graph. It tells you that the dividend of Johnson & Johnson since December of 1994 has grown by 12.6% per annum. You still have the capital appreciation like you had before, but we've tried to explain them a little better. Now you're showing investment plus appreciation without dividend, annualized rate of return without dividend, total investment plus appreciation plus dividends added in, or in this case the $1,907 of dividends added in, and we've color coded this in our dividend blue so that it's a little easier for you to see. Now when you click the box dividend reinvestment, by simply redrawing and calculating Johnson & Johnson now with dividend reinvestment, there's a couple of important differences. First of all, I want to point out that we leave the original capital appreciation at the top of the performance calculation. That's so that you have a perspective of what the changes will be. However, you'll notice now that our beginning number of shares was 89.14, but our year-end shares now are increasing based on reinvesting the dividend. So we reinvested $25.59, and now our end of shares going to 91 to 93, etc. And by the end of 2012, from our original 89 shares, we now have 134 shares. But what's important is our total dividends reinvested have been actually more than what we saw with our original iteration. Our dividend growth rate average is still the same. Our total investment plus appreciation with reinvestment of dividends is now $11,085, and that compares to capital appreciation only without the dividend reinvestment option up here. And again, we left this number intact up here just so you could see how much additional, how much more capital appreciation or how much effect the dividend reinvestment actually had on your total rate of return. And now you have our numbers. You have the fiscal year end, the dividends per share is not going to change, growth rate is going to be the same, your payout ratio will be the same, but now you've got a new calculation for the number of shares. You can see how much you have dividends reinvested, etc. But there's one other feature that I really want to showcase here. We've added an opportunity for you to input your own money. For example, you could simply add a 0 here, and instead of doing these calculations on $1,000, I'm now calculating it on $10,000. But let's say you wanted to check your own amount. Let's say you had $7,659 invested in Johnson & Johnson by looking at your brokerage statement. You can now plug in the exact amount that you have invested. Now, there's one little problem with this. I want to remind you that we're only showing calendar years here. So obviously, this calculation is investing $7,659 on this day and holding it to this day. But you could get close. If you say you own Johnson & Johnson for the last 5 years or so, you could draw a 6-year graph, and you'd be assuming that you bought Johnson & Johnson on this day and held it to here, but you could see what your performance has been and what dividend reinvestment would have accomplished for you. So we hope everybody enjoys this new feature. It's real simple to use. You can always just simply eliminate what you typed in here and default back to $1,000, or you could run any amount of money you want. You simply check this box or uncheck it if you want to show dividends reinvested, or if you want to look at performance without dividends reinvested. And it's easy to use, and we hope you'll get a lot of value out of it. We think adding the dividend growth rate average is real important and feature for us, and we hope you find everything here useful. And I thank you for listening. This is Chuck Carnevale saying goodbye.